So in this chapter, I'm going to give you an overview of what missing middle housing is, and then just show you some photographic examples of different cities and smaller towns from all across the country that has a range of these missing middle housing types. So what is missing middle housing? This is a diagram that we created several years ago that has really promoted the concept and enabled the concept to really catch on very rapidly in communities across the country. On your left-hand side of this diagram in white are the single-family detached housing types. On your right-hand side of this diagram are the larger 4 or 5 story plus story mixed-use buildings or larger apartment buildings. And we've done a really great job of planning and zoning for single family, and we know how to build a lot of those. And on the other side, in the past 5 to 10 years in particular, we've really thought about how to plan for and figured out how to build those larger urban projects. And it's all of these housing types in between that we call the missing middle. It's duplexes, it's fourplexes, it's bungalow courts, it's live-work buildings. And what's important about the concept of the missing middle is even though these buildings have multiple units in a building, they never get larger than the scale of a house. And that's a really, really important concept. And if you're going to take one concept away from this webinar, that is probably the most important one. And so why do we call them missing? We call them missing because there are a lot of barriers currently in place for missing middle housing to get built. We really haven't seen a lot of these housing types built in the last 30, 40, 50 years, and the majority of them, the existing examples, were built in pre-1940s neighborhoods. And so they're missing because there's a lot of zoning barriers in place that I just mentioned earlier. They're missing because it's really hard, or it's much harder to finance a building with more than 4 units in it. It's missing because, our industries, the building industries and the development industries are not set up to focus on this type of housing. And so some of it's being built, but it's not being built sort of at a production scale. It's being built by smaller, sort of local, more boutique scale builders. And so there's very little of it being built. And so, you see examples of these missing middle types in places in big cities like Denver, Colorado, You see this great collection of beautiful historic missing middle types. You see them in medium-sized city. This is Santa Barbara, California, It's got some of the most vast collection of these missing middle types of any community that I've been in, worked in and across the country. It's courtyard apartment, bungalow court on the upper right-hand side, a multiplex small, another example of a courtyard apartment in the lower left-hand side. So, and then smaller communities, Even places like Norman, Oklahoma have really great examples of these missing middle housing types, and they're typically sprinkled throughout the downtown adjacent neighborhoods. And it's geographically diverse, the locations and the places these exist, even in places like Omaha, Nebraska in the Midwest, Great collection of missing middle housing types. In places like Detroit, Michigan, we're seeing that missing middle housing types, there's a really, really great collection and really beautifully sort of historic examples in Detroit. They're playing a really critical role in places like Detroit in the revitalization of the downtown adjacent in the urban neighborhoods. And so I like to sort of conclude that sort of group of examples using New Orleans, Louisiana, It has a very similar, what we call the palette or the collection of missing middle housing types. But what's great about these missing middle types is even though that group or that palette is similar in different cities or towns, is they have adapted and adopted sort of differences based on local culture and local climate. And New Orleans kind of reinforces that to the most to the largest extent. In the upper right-hand side, your upper right-hand side, there's this side-by-side duplex, which in the New Orleans example is actually 2 shotgun houses that are put together. And if you don't know what a shotgun house is, it's actually sort of a very narrow, very deep unit type that's very typical in the southeast and hot, humid areas where you can actually open the front door and you can open the back door, and it allows for really great cross ventilation to naturally cool the buildings. The other thing that's really neat about the duplex as it's adapted to New Orleans is that it has a really deep overhang so that it prevents rain from coming in the windows. You can still have the windows down for that cross ventilation, and it also passively shades the house so that it keeps it cooler in the hot summer weather. And so just like to show that as an example of ways that the missing middle types are similar but have adapted to different communities across the country. So that concludes this introduction and definition of missing middle chapter. And so in the next chapter, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to walk through a series of photographic examples of the full range of missing middle types and explain to you the characteristics of those types.